refreshments and snacks. We are privileged to have an impressive list of speakers for tonight's program, and after our formal program concludes, there will be time for further social interaction and noshing, and we will also screen a video on SPSSI's 85-year history, assuming the projector cooperates with us. We are gathering tonight to commemorate 3/4 of a century of engagement by social scientists in activities with the goal of bettering the world. Many in this room might ask, what's such a big deal about engaging the world? That is, I do that every day across the street. Well, for psychologists who deliver therapy and healing, or research, or psychologists in industry, this is a big deal. Psychologists often figuratively spend most of our careers and our energies within the clinic, the university, or the lab. To the psychologist who formed SPSSI in the 1930s, as with our current membership, that is simply not enough. SPSSI is composed of individuals who are concerned that not everyone on this planet enjoys the same human rights, access to resources, freedom, and respect. Tonight we celebrate those within SPSSI who have pursued this goal within the constellation of the United Nations. We also recognize those affiliated with the United Nations who likewise are committed to these goals. Before we start our program, however, we would like to observe a moment of silence, and we're going to ask Dr. Sherry Levi to lead us in that. I might mention that Dr. Levi is one of the newest members of the SPSSI team. She brings to the team an impressive background on ageism and intergroup attitudes, and she has worked with a number of SPSSI members in the development of a paper on the Ukrainian conflict and children's rights, which is, you may see a copy in the back. Dr. Levi.
Thank you, David, and welcome everyone. I'm so pleased and honored to be here. On behalf of the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, UN-NGO team, I would like to acknowledge that the land that I am standing on is the ancestral and traditional homelands of the Lenape people who were violently displaced and who continue to face human rights violations. We honor and pay respect to the Lenape people and indigenous peoples past and present. We recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis, and other health, housing, educational, economic, political, and social global crises continue to expose a multitude of new and ongoing human rights violations. We reaffirm our commitment and dedication to advocating for social justice and human rights policies and programs through working collaboratively with other NGOs, UN missions, UN entities, and civil society. We request a moment of silence to honor and pay respect to lives lost, lives forever altered, and human rights violations around the world, past and present. Very pleased to invite up to the podium another member of our team, a longtime member, Dr. Deborah Fish-Braden.
Thank you, Sherry. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us today at our SPSSI celebration of 75 years of engagement here at the United Nations. My name is Deborah Fish-Braden, and I am a SPSSI UN team member. I have the honor and the distinct pleasure to introduce our first speaker this evening, the Ambassador of Costa Rica to the United Nations, Her Excellency Maritza Chan. Ambassador Chan's long record of service as a diplomat and activist is briefly mentioned in your bio in your program, but I'd like to highlight a few points. In August of this year, Ambassador Chan was elevated to her current position as permanent representative from Costa Rica to the United Nations, and so I ask you to join me in congratulating her on that new post. And I add that Ambassador Chan is the first woman to occupy this role in Costa Rica since they signed the UN Charter in 1945. In her more than 20 years of service at the highest political level, she has advocated for arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, served as Costa Rica's lead advocate for the Arms Trade Treaty, and was recognized by the United Nations Regional Center for Peace, Disarmament, and Development in Latin America and the Caribbean. She's recognized also as an expert on international peace and security issues, and she is an advocate for the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. Ambassador Chan is currently serving as the Vice Chair of the Open-Ended Working Group on Conventional Ammunitions, with the goal of establishing a new global framework for lifetime management of ammunitions. And in July of 2021 and 2022, the mission of Costa Rica joined with the SPSSI UN team and co-sponsored a high-level political forum side event to address the needs to eliminate systemic racism and racial and ethnic discrimination in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The SPSSI team is grateful for the mission of Costa Rica, support, and specifically the contributions of Ambassador Chan and Daniel Zavala, Minister Counselor of the Mission of Costa Rica to the UN. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Chan to the podium.
We forgot to mention that I'm also an advocate for civil society organizations and transparency, online and offline. We need inclusion. The tasks of our world are so paramount that we need all hands on deck. We cannot continue to exclude civil society organizations or groups, think tanks, academia, research centers, just because it's a member state driven process. That is completely a fallacy that we refuse to acknowledge. So let me tell you how pleased I am to participate in this event to commemorate the 75 years of engagement of the psychological study of social issues within the UN, 75 years in which my country has been able to partner on different issues. I'm a woman of color, the first to be appointed ambassador of Costa Rica to the United Nations. I know that the bar for me is higher, that I'm supposed to be technically strong, politically sound, and I cannot fail, and I must exercise my duties with excellence and professionalism. But that's not a problem. We are raised that way. Costa Rica, it's a multi-ethnic, pluricultural, and diverse nation. And I think that's part of our strength. In my little country, which is the size of West Virginia, we are recognized as a champion of climate change, environmental protection, human rights, democracy, freedom of expression. And as a developing country, we have achieved standards of living comparable to those of the developed world. I think that being like we are is part of our ethos. Democracy, inclusion, diversity are part of or something intangible that goes beyond class or speak of your class. It's embedded in our DNA to do things right, to build bridges instead of walls, and to try to have a better world that we received. We are a firm believer of the prevalence of human rights, and we defend women's rights and girls' rights, because as half of the world's population, we deserve, and it's time, a seat at the table, and we don't have one, let's make one for us. At all decision levels. We also advocate for the participation of civil society, and we do so because civil society is our eyes and ears on the ground. You're the knowledge multipliers. You are there in the local communities trying to help the people that need you the most, and it is at the local level we build democracy, sustainable peace, tolerance, inclusion, and all the things we need to improve our communities, our societies, our countries, and the international system. We have also defended you at the UN level, and with the initiative. When the pandemic happened, the UN closed its doors, but also to civil society, but also closed the virtual doors to Zoom meetings. And during that time, Costa Rica consistently requested that meetings should be open to civil society. So there was transparency, there was exchange of views, but that didn't happen. We're facing a pushback, but we are here to push back on the pushbacks. And those recommendations were endorsed by 50 member states and more than 200 civil society organizations, and which was sent to the Secretary General for his consideration. In our common agenda, the Secretary General makes very interesting points. First, he recognizes that women and girls are at the center of sustainable development, that without women and girls, we will not be able to reach not a single one of the SDGs.
You're in there.
He also recognizes that this is the
one.
largest generation of youth in human history, and youth is the missing link in everything we're doing. In Women, Peace and Security, the debate that I just had at the Security Council, the issue is age, the age of a woman. In Youth, Peace and Security is the gender. Male have more opportunities than girls. So we need to change that and bridge the silos that are dividing the organization and create more solidarity among groups. I like to say, let's advocate not only for indigenous people, for people with disabilities, or for women, or for the LGBTQ community. Let's solidarity among all those groups. So we have an indigenous woman who's also disabled, who's also a lesbian, trying to advocate for excessive military spending and how those resources will affect the sustainable development goals, or even the capacity of a country of satisfying the needs of offering universal health care to all their citizens. I come from a country that has a welfare state and it's a solidarity system. We were talking about that previously. In Costa Rica, if you have a heart attack and you are part of the system as an employee of the government or the private sector, you won't have to pay for your surgery. But also, if you are an immigrant, and we are a bridge between the north and the south, and we get many people coming from Venezuela, Haiti, even Africa, crossing through the Americans on the way north. If that person comes and it's pregnant, has a baby, or has not been vaccinated against COVID, we will do that for them at no cost, because it's solidarity. I think that's the word that we need today, and translate that word into actions in everything we do, because if we as states do not embrace organizations such as yours and others that are fighting the good fights, talking for those without a voice, or those who we refuse to hear, who I cannot foretell what the future will look like. If it is bleak now, If we can reverse that trend, if we practice solidarity, understanding, and most importantly, humility in understanding our limits, and also seeking advice of psychologists whenever it's needed. In this special occasion, and our common agenda, let me take it to the third point, recognize the role of civil society. That was not without pushback from many delegations. We were not one, but the world is tired. We are all tired of climate change, of disasters, of humanitarian crisis, of violations of human rights, of journalists being kidnapped, censored, of all the things that are going on in the world with human impunity. So we have two options. The first one is to maximize the opportunities and advantages of the digital world for greater participation, which allow us to include more voices in intergovernmental spaces, contributing to a renewal of ideas as well as the legitimacy of the decision made. But not all voices are equal. And this is a point sometimes that goes unseen in the UN. If you are an intern here, it's because your parents can afford to send you to New York. But I would like to see an intern that comes from an indigenous community or Afro-Caribbean region in Central America or the Caribbean, who will never have the opportunity to listen and engage at this level because their parents cannot afford their ticket or keeping him or her for 3 or 6 months in New York. So not all civil society organizations are equal. There are small ones, there are big ones, they're always, some of them have more power than corporations. So let's pay attention to the diversity within not only ourselves but in the organizations. And the second, leadership. We need states to lead. To lead by example. In the civic space, defending civic space in the UN, and have multi-actor, multi-stakeholders dialogues as concrete starting points, which are concrete advocacy opportunities for civil society and can contribute to safe and trusted environments between governments and civil society. So in this special occasion, let's build bridges. Let's create more venues for collaboration, cooperation, solidarity, understanding, compassion, and embracing those who need us the most. I'm here to remind member states of the promises that we have not fulfilled, of the goals that we need to achieve, and the urgency of making sure that no one, absolutely no one, is left behind. So I thank you and I'm very delighted to be here.
My name is Coran Okorodudu, Professor Emerita of Psychology and Africana Studies at Rowan University in Southern New Jersey. It's an honor for me to introduce the next speaker. Mr. Rio Hada is Chief of the Equality, Development, and Rule of Law section of the New York office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Over the past several years, he has led the human rights mainstreaming agenda in the UN system and promoted human rights-based implementation of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Hada, who will give brief opening remarks on behalf of the New York office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Thank you very much. It's hard to follow suit after such an inspiring speech by the ambassador. I'll try my best. And I'd like to, on behalf of the Assistant Secretary General and of our Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, I would like to thank you for inviting me here and for your recognition of the work of our office. And I must be humble that our human rights work is really not possible without the active involvement and support of civil society. So I would like to congratulate Species for the 75 years of your engagement with the United Nations and your commitment and support for the promotion and protection of human rights. In all these years, Species has been at the forefront of social justice, leveraging social science to create social change. And for many years, our office has had the pleasure of collaborating with you on a number of occasions, particularly on the fight against racism and racial discrimination. The COVID-19 pandemic has again demonstrated that racism, discrimination, and poverty form a vicious cycle, leading to deprivation of livelihood and dignity. So your work in producing and promoting science, data, and evidence helps us to better understand those human behavior, prejudice, and bigotry that are at the root of such discrimination. And our office has been working on issues concerning people of African descent for many years as part of our overall work on combating racism and racial discrimination. Africans and people of African descent were first identified as a victim group in the Durban Declaration and Program of Action adopted in 2001. Our office further emphasized this population group when the International Decade for People of African Descent was launched in 2015. And in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic and the global anti-racism protests that followed after the murder of George Floyd shed light on the urgency to address long-standing structural inequalities and systemic racism affecting people of African descent. In response, our office further strengthened its effort in addressing issues affecting this population group and elevating this group as one of the priority focus group in our strategic management plan. Our office is working towards the implementation of the 4-point agenda towards transformative change for racial justice and equality, which contains 20 actionable recommendations to end systemic racism and human rights violations by law enforcement against Africans and people of African descent. But beyond racism and racial discrimination, the contribution of the science of psychology and the practitioners of psychology to human rights are enormous and need to be further exploited. Certainly in terms of the right to health, mental health, but also in areas such as ageism and age discrimination, right to education, counterterrorism, hate crimes, torture, and looking at the implications of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence. And looking at the slides before we started, I see that many of you are actively working in these areas, which is very encouraging. But in today's context of increasing polarization and rising inequality within and among states, your role and the role of civil society more broadly is ever more critical to bring different voices to the table to build trust and make the world fit for the looming challenges, and your efforts to protect the dignity of people and amplify the voices of those usually unheard. Your persistent creativity and determination to bring forward scientific research and evidence to challenge the status quo. They are at the heart of our common agenda and critical in our pursuit of social justice and human rights for all. We look forward to our continued collaboration, and thank you again for inviting us here.
Ms. Lily Graham is a senior liaison officer at UNESCO's New York office, where she is responsible for promoting programs in the fields of education, culture, and social sciences. She has supported the establishment of a broad range of partnerships at the United Nations headquarters, including the Secretary General's Global Education First initiative, launched in 2012, in which she worked to expand UNESCO's collaboration with civil society. Before joining UNESCO, she worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bulgaria, where she served as a diplomat responsible for the human rights and humanitarian issues at the United Nations. We are absolutely honored to have Ms. Graham with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Livert, and good evening, everyone. I'm also absolutely delighted and honored to join you on this particular occasion, and certainly to share congratulations for the 75th anniversary of the Society. We have enjoyed close partnerships and with the Society throughout many decades. We know that the Society was one of the most engaged around the early talks in the fights against racism, and indeed wanted to amplify the message shared by the previous speaker, Mr. Hada, that indeed she definitely contributed and enriched the discussion on the fight of racial discrimination. Particularly in UNESCO, you might recall that significant contribution was done to the elaboration of UNESCO's Declaration on the scientific basis for human dignity. So I'm really happy to join the other speakers and greet you today, and certainly share appreciation for the contribution of the Society, spreading the message of solidarity, social justice, and inclusion. We heard from previous speakers this appreciation, and definitely from the level of UNESCO and my personal experience as I worked in the last 10 years at UNESCO New York office, we very much engage and enjoy the participation of the special representative of the Society, Mr. Joseph de Meyer, in advancing issues related to education, and most particularly human rights education and global citizenship education. Let me just recall that UNESCO also stands behind the principle of engaging closely with civil society members. This is certainly one of our principles. And then, just a few weeks ago, at the Transforming Education Summit, member states and key stakeholders agreed on the way forward to transform education, and this includes engagement and participation of civil society actors. One major message that came from this Transforming Education Summit is that if we are to look and transform the provision of education and lifelong learning, then we have to certainly regard education as a matter not only for ministries of education, but also as a matter of whole government and whole society approach. And clearly the most active members of the dialogues and the national consultations that took place in the last 7 months were civil society partners. So thank you very much for the engagement. Thank you, Dr. Livert, and particular thanks to our close friend and contributor, Dr. Joseph Dumer, who unfortunately is not able to join us today, but we truly appreciate the engagement of the society in advancing critical issues from the world, in advancing the message of solidarity, inclusion, and social justice. Thank you, really, and looking forward to working closely with all.
I'm Harold Cook. I'm with Representative SPSSI, and I'm the next speaker. Dan and I first met about 20 years ago or so. We were both young NGOs. Dan worked for Save the Children, and I was a rep for the American Psychological Association. And then Dan subsequently became a staff member at UNICEF, and we then periodically would go to the Oyster Bar and have a new Dutch matjes herring. And at that point I knew Dan would become very successful when he joined the herring with Dutch gin. And I thought that was a crucial element to succeed at the UN. And so I'm very happy to have known him all this time. And he's had subsequently he's had a very successful career at the UN. He's now with UN Women as the chief, excuse me, he's the chief of, I mean not chief, he's the director, strategic partnership at UN Women. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dan, who's going to say a few words.
I assure you I haven't had any of the Dutch gin yet today, so I'll try and be as coherent as I can. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here at this event. As Harold said, I remember, I think the first time I came to this building was about 21 years ago. We were setting up the Save the Children office, and I was trying to find office space. There wasn't any here. So I ended up in Tudor City, just down the road, but I would be here a lot. It's nice to be back here. My boss, Seymour, Dr. Bahus, would have been here to speak with you. She takes, I think, the role of civil society enormously seriously. Really respected and values it very, very much. She was in the Security Council for most of the day, and other things got backed up, and I think she knew in advance that it wouldn't be possible for her, but she definitely sends her regards and congratulations. 75 years is a long time, and it's a long record, I think, of achievement and important engagement. We've already heard from a number of speakers about the importance of civil society actors at the United Nations, and that's been true, I think, from establishment to today. If I just take the case of UN Women, Resolution 64289, which established us, we're the youngest part of the UN, and we're very, very much, in many ways, the child of civil society demands that the UN delivers better on gender equality. Some of you may remember GEAR, the Gender Equality Architecture Reform movement among CSOs that really shaped what we are today as UN Women. And you see that very much in our DNA as an organisation and in the way that we work. As an example, in the UN system, it's not unique to us. I mean, I think it's common to many parts of the system. About a quarter of our programme spent goes directly to civil society organisations. We run the Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women, which provides grants over its lifetime since it was established, more than $200 million. We have the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, which has been, for example, recently directly sending funding to women's organizations in Ukraine who are doing incredibly important work and would be unable to do it without these resources. We are setting up a fund. We've already been transferring money to women's CSOs in Afghanistan who are unable under the rules, if you like, of the administration there right now to function with their own bank accounts, with finances, and we're able to provide cash to them to allow them to continue work such as running the only functioning shelter right now in Kabul. So very, very much, I think, and we're just one example. I'm not trying to claim that UN Women is somehow unique, and my colleagues in OHCHR or UNESCO or any other part of the UN system aren't also very, very closely linked to the civil society movement in our history and in our present, in what we do today. But I wanted to spend a moment talking about tomorrow and the role of civil society in the UN, looking into the future a little bit. There is a point of view that we are at a very important time in the history of the United Nations, an inflection point, if you will, that some time ago the UN maybe took a little detour when countries such as mine were part of the process of decolonization, and the UN stepped in to support the governments of those countries to deliver essential services. There are many people right now who remember the UN from, for example, the UNICEF growth chart that was in the room when they were a child to go and see the doctor to check that they were okay. That remember the role of the UN really in making their country function, whether it, and you know, as Harold mentioned, I'm formerly from UNICEF, you know, so it's very common. You go places and people say, yeah, I remember the immunization system here, polio eradication. That was the UN because governments in those countries didn't have the capacity to deliver all those things for their citizens. The world's very different today. The challenges we face are not primarily defined by the lack of capacity of governments. They're actually primarily defined by issues that can only be solved through the collaboration of governments. Public health issues, I don't mean to elaborate, but issues around climate, issues around crisis and conflicts, which are increasingly networked. And, for example, you know, look in the Sahel, Lake Chad Basin. These are global international issues. They can't be understood as issues of one state on its own. And a lot of those interlocking global issues are really at the heart, I'm very glad the ambassador raised it, of our common agenda. And again, there is a point of view that our common agenda represents a kind of reset of the UN, potentially. A reset that in some ways would be more familiar to the founders than what the UN grew into through this period of compensating for limited capacity of governments. A UN that is very much around shared principles, cooperation, convening different groups across society to achieve what needs to be achieved. And in that context, of course, and again, as the ambassador said, the centrality of civil society is very, very apparent, very, very clear in the way that our common agenda has been constructed. But I want to talk also specifically about what SPSSI does. Because one of the key things, one of the key challenges that we have in the implementation of that common agenda is around areas very much of concern to the social sciences. Very much central to what your area of expertise. And let me give you just an example, and I'll end with that. Behavioural science. We work in UN Women on gender equality. Now, for example, in a survey we did recently in 20 countries, roughly a quarter of the people surveyed believed that it was appropriate, in certain circumstances, for a man to hit his wife if she had behaved improperly. Now, we are running programs on ending violence against women. We spend a lot of money on that, collectively as the UN system, not just UN Women. Colleagues at UNFPA, important work in OHCHR elsewhere. We are pushing water up a hill when a quarter of the people surveyed in the survey believe that. And even worse, that of that 25%, it's pretty much equally men and women that believe that's appropriate. So we need the expertise in, for example, behavioural sciences of people such as yourselves and SPSSI, as you look at your next 75 years, to address those sorts of challenges. You know, we have a partnership that we convene in UN Women with the marketing industry. advertisers, basically, people involved in advertising. They represent about $500 billion of spend on advertising a year. We work with them to try and make sure that those ads are not regressive, that they don't promote stereotypes, negatives. It's called the Unstereotype Alliance. It's about stereotypes of gender. But we don't just need the marketeers, we don't just need the advertising industry, we need behavioral scientists in that class. So I give you that as just one example of what I wanted to say to you tonight, apart from thank you, apart from congratulations, apart from sorry that I'm going to have to leave early because I have to help put my son to bed. What I really wanted to say is, I hope that those first 70 years can be just the start. Because I think, and you know, like a good bureaucrat, I say, not what I think, I say there is a point of view. There is a point of view that as the UN evolves into that next 75 years, what you do will be even more important than it was in the first 75. So thank you again, and have a really great evening. I'm sorry I won't be able to stay around long enough to help with the food and drink, but I wish you every success, and I'm looking forward to seeing you around the UN for as long as we're all still here. Thank you.
Dr. Liberato Bautista serves as president of CoNGO, the Conference of Non-Governmental Organizations and Consultative Relationships with the United Nations, which boasts some 600 accredited NGOs, including SPSSI. He is also the Assistant General Secretary for the United Nations and International Affairs at the General Board of the Church and Society. Levi leads, manages, and represents international priorities for the United Methodist Church at the United Nations and other international settings. He also provides constant support for the myriad NGOs at the UN, and we are honored to have him here tonight.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Chan, representatives of the UN system here, NGO colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I feel good among friends. Thank you, David, for inviting me to say a few words tonight. Congratulations to the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues as you celebrate 75 years of commitment to human rights and social justice. I want you to know you are a valued member of CoNGO, and at some point you were on the board of CoNGO. I would be remiss if I didn't say I want to welcome you to this building, the Church Center, which was built by my organization, the United Methodist Church. I take special pride, and I was talking to your colleague, Mr. Ibrahim Salama, whom I hosted in my office yesterday, on a conversation about the role of faith-based organizations within the United Nations, and especially in the promotion of human rights mechanisms. I was showing him of the picture of the Methodist Church in London, which hosted the inaugural Assembly of the United Nations. So the first Assembly of the United Nations was held at the Methodist Central Hall at Westminster Abbey, at Westminster Hall, I should say, in London. That's why in 1963 we built this building dedicated entirely to the witness of faith-based organizations at the United Nations. Professor Tapushan knows very well that I've been here for the last 25 years representing the United Methodist Church worldwide.
Sure.
At the outset, I want to congratulate the organizations and retiring team members being specially recognized tonight, including one of CoNGO's substantive committees, the NGO Committee on Status of Women. I feel good and proud to be among active NGO leaders, many of whom I know and are friends. Ancient Greece spoke of time as both chronos and kairos. Chronos time is how days and our lives are measured quantitatively. This celebration tonight almost certainly can be about looking at how the years chronologically have gone by and what milestones can be celebrated in the life and work of the society in these past 75 years. it would be wise, I may suggest, to have this written for the succeeding generations of NGO leaders and academics who must know the society's rich history of social engagement. But beyond the quantitative chronos is the kairos time, the qualitative time of life. I am sure tonight, in words spoken at this very podium or whispered in the conversations among you, will be plenty of recalling those kairotic moments in which the organization and its members have seized the propitious time to make a stand and find common cause for human rights and social justice. And of social justice and human rights, nothing is ever sufficient, no matter how we speak of this, because in public squares and discourses, as is in decision-making arenas, the causes for human rights and social justice remain poorly served. Even under threat, human rights defenders are some of the most endangered human species and activists in the world today. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is celebrated next year for its 75 years as well, speaks of human dignity as the building block of human rights. And the panoply of human rights instruments are the protections we give to that human dignity. The struggle for human rights and social justice, about which you have committed your society to do, intersect with so many other struggles in the chronos of time. That must be the case because our world today is increasingly securitized and militarized, globalized and yet ethnicized, gendered and sexualized. And the search for justice is not necessarily at the top of the multilateral agenda. In fact, the search for justice, I might say, is the Achilles heel of multilateralism today. The democratic deficit in the multilateral arena finds expression in the difficult situation human rights defenders and social justice activists find themselves in when trying to secure and access time and space in multilateral discussions. I say this even with the utmost respect for the international institution called the United Nations. It matters to recall what the former United Nations Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld said of this institution, that the UN was not built to bring us to heaven, but to save us from going to hell. I suppose that is what SPSSI has been helping this intergovernmental concert of nations through the academic and practical work of your society, addressing helping us to move out of the hell and the trauma of historic evils, not the least of slavery, colonialism, and racism. That these issues find space for the critical inquiry in which you do, and you bring to light analysis that help us collaborate together for the securing of human wellness and planetary sustainability. Your event tonight gives expression to what I call the power of co. The power of co. Co being the predicate for the words collaboration, consultation, and cooperation. By multiplying these practices, the competencies that we bring as civil society to the UN create impact far stronger than when we do them in silos and worse alone. Let me conclude with the following remarks. CoNGO is celebrating its own 75th anniversary next year, and I'm excited to announce that the anniversary committee, headed by Gillian Sorensen, some of you know Gillian as the Assistant Secretary General under Kofi Annan, has accepted to be the co-chair together with Patrick Ray of the Knights Templars. We have lined up many activities across New York, Geneva, Vienna, including the invitation at UN ESCAP in Bangkok. In our 75th year, we will also be launching 2 NGO committees, and I invite the NGOs here to join what will be launched as the NGO Committee on Racism. Let me put the full NGO Committee on Racism, Colonialism, Xenophobia, and all forms of discrimination and intolerance. And I'm looking forward to subcommittees on, say, anti-Semitism, subcommittee on colonialism, subcommittee on racism, etc. within this global committee. We will also be launching an NGO committee of youth, not on, NGO committee of youth and future generation. You will recognize the name Future Generation from the Our Common Agenda of the Secretary General. I look forward to your participation and engagement. There will be bi-monthly global conversations on timely issues that will align with CoNGO's theme, which is defining the present, shaping the future. But for the 75th anniversary, we're adding a burden on all of those who will organize this session, which is making the change now. I suppose your society is defining the present with your critical inquiry upon the social issues. You're also shaping the future by the proposals of your students and of your academic analysis. But I dare us all to make the change now. And that will be the mantra for the CoNGO Assembly, or for the CoNGO 75th anniversary. I wish for the society continued leadership with other NGOs and CSOs in continuing to amplify civil society voice and presencing that voice so that they are heard loudly and clearly in the halls of decision making. Beyond voice, you are in a position to empower the human agency, including the agency of many others who do not have the wherewithal to come here. But through your research, you amplify their voice so that they matter in the stories of struggles for human rights and for social justice. Not especially those that speak to the outrages to human dignity, violations of human rights, and injuries to the planet that compromise the integrity of the ecological system. Just 3 more sentences, Dr. Livert. Your voice, our voice, as NGOs accredited at the UN, are specially charged with the responsibility to contribute to the elaboration of how we, the peoples of the world, might secure human well-being and planetary security.
We have some remarks by Patrick Sciarratta recorded. He could not be here tonight, given that we're a little behind time. We will have that available to you on the website. That will also have the recording of today's session. So we look forward to that. So, Harold, you're up.
Greetings all, and thank you for this opportunity to congratulate the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, SPSSI, on the occasion of their 75th anniversary. Working alongside the United Nations for so long has undoubtedly helped those you have encountered understand more fully the reasons why we believe so strongly in the work and mission of the United Nations, and over so many decades of work, volunteerism, and commitment. The organization I represent, which is the Global NGO Executive Committee, NGO DPI to the old-timers like me, itself has a storied 60-year history of working alongside UNDGC, once called DPI, in a way providing the very same type of sage, sane advice that SPSSI has provided to its counterparts and community here. For most of our existence, GNEC, like you, coveted our advisory role when it came to planning major conferences with UN staff, planning our own briefings, and the NGO reporter. There we have shared the same kind of helpful, nurturing information and counsel to those in our civil society community, as well as those in the General Assembly, Secretariat, and among the missions who might listen and learn from we the peoples what the diplomats may have missed. We're proud to include SPSSI as a well-respected member of our UNDGC community since 1987, and with the United Nations in general since the late 1940s. Like each of our successful counterparts, they bring their talents and expertise to add merit to our discussions and plans. Generally, SPSSI works in conjunction with the UN by preparing programs and panels on current social issues and regularly contributes and collaborates with other UN NGOs. In fact, the organization I serve, GNEC, would like to further encourage that. SPSSI's UN NGO team seeks to bring psychological research and theory to bear on a diverse range of global policies and human rights efforts. In fact, this is where I would like to focus my comments in relationship to how and where we at GNEC might be useful to NGOs like SPSSI, and where they can educate us by opining on the implications of our recent work, which is the use of scientific data to improve our relations throughout the civil society community related to the United Nations missions, vision, and service. I bring up both of these efforts during your 75th anniversary celebrations because both will enable new and better ways for us to help the helpers. And that has indeed become the first and most urgent mission of GNEC in these late-stage pandemic and war-filled days. And we urge the same urgency of purpose for SPSSI now and in its next successful 75. Servant leadership. More than sage advice, we at GNEC are finding servant leadership ought to be the goal of any agency, bringing together many in the contact, debate, collaboration, and eventual support of the institution we all admire and hope our actions contribute to the better world we all desire. We heartily thank the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues for being a big part of this process over so many years. Bravo! Keep up the good work. Keep up the good and special work you have done, you are doing, and we hope you will continue to press on doing in the field of service to humanity's psychological, spiritual, and physical health on this planet. Congratulations.
Unfortunately, it's wiring here, and I'd hate to trip, but I won't. Unfortunately, Florence Denmark couldn't be here. She has difficulty with, she has some health problems, part of which she can't walk. It's very hard to walk. But she did provide me with some statement that I'd be very happy to share with you. She asked me to read her comments. Just briefly, I originally met Florence when we both became the first NGOs when the APA had gotten its initial accreditation, and we've been colleagues and friends since then. And over the years, Florence has become not only played an important role at the UN, but has also played an important role professionally. And you can read her bio and you'll be quite impressed. You'll get a tiny sense of Florence's contribution to the UN as an NGO and to psychology. So her statement is the following. Excuse me. Congratulations to SPSSI on its 75th anniversary as an NGO at the UN. SPSSI is very important to me. When I was in graduate school, I joined a SPSSI group. And when I became a member of APA, SPSSI Division 9 was the first division I joined and have been a member for over 60 years. I will always be there for SPSSI and its commitment to the advancement of social issues. The advancement of social issues that SPSSI plays, SPSSI plays an important and meaningful role within the UN, and the development of the psychological coalition at the UN. SPSSI and some individuals from other organizations who were NGOs at the UN, including Mary O'Neill Barry, me, Harold Cook, Orlando Padua, and myself, who's referring to herself, who started founded the Psychological Coalition at the UN. Thank you. That's basically it. She says, I wish SPSSI much success over the next 75 years.
I have a friend that travels with me, so I have to make sure she's with me at all times. I introduced myself to you earlier. It's a great pleasure for me, in fact, an honor for me, to introduce the next speaker, who is both a friend and the distinguished chair of the New York Non-Governmental Organization Committee on the Status of Women. Her effective leadership has enabled the New York CSW to serve as a global intersectional feminist network on gender equality, spearheading the Beijing +5+25 campaign and convening a global civil society advisory group to support UN Women's Generation Equality Forums. Please join me in welcoming Houry to give brief remarks on behalf of the New York NGO Committee on the Status of Women.
Wow. Okay. Is that really me? Thank you. What an honor to be introduced by you and in such words. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me. Congratulations. I'll add my congratulations to SPSSI. There's so many places I want to start with, but I wanted to just take a moment and say I stand here in solidarity with our sisters in Iran fighting for choices that should be very natural for them. I know I took a moment earlier, so I don't want to waste another minute, and I will be very brief, but I also want to honor, Ambassador, your words. You moved me. I mean, you've done this before several times. But I thank you so much for speaking from your heart and for standing not only with civil society, but for gender equality specifically. And I want to highlight one thing that you said that very few ambassadors mention is demilitarizing this world. And that's, any opportunity I get, I'm going to really congratulate you on speaking up on that. And I do hope, I know gender equality is what we do, but I do believe that the militarization of this world is really what's keeping us behind in every single aspect, in climate justice and everything. So now that I got my personal wishes out of the way, I do want to say that I stand here on the shoulders of thousands and thousands of women that for 50 years have been building NGO-CSW. I thank you so much for giving me so much credit for building this in the last 3.5 years that I've been the chair. But I would not be here if it wasn't for all of these women. And I want to specifically mention Sun Young Yoon, Susan O'Malley, the two very recent past chairs who took me under their wings. I come from a completely different background. I've only been doing this human rights work for the last 11 years. Before that, I had no idea where United Nations was, believe it or not. I lived in New York City for 45 years, but my world was a different world. But I carried a lot of trauma in my veins for generations. I'm the grandchild of survivors of the Armenian genocide. I'm also the child of survivors of the Lebanese Civil War. I'm also a survivor of an early marriage. So you can imagine why it is so important for me to be here, standing up for every single woman and girl in this world that needs their voice to be heard. We will not stop. We will not slow down. There are days that we're exhausted. How many times can you say the same thing? Gender equality is important. The rights of girls are important. And then we see what happens in places like Iran or in conflict zones like Ukraine that's happening right now. So it is something that we're not going to give up on. We are here, and and I wish UN Women representative was here. We're so grateful for UN Women also to be standing by us. But I want to close by really thanking the current NGO CSW team. I have one of them here, Pamela Morgan, and the one thing that we learned through COVID, and this was something that actually Levi also mentioned, we learned that the only way we're going to survive is if we work in a collaborative, transparent, shared leadership model. And this is what I've been saying in all our meetings for the last 3.5 years in the little boxes that we've gathered thousands of people. But it is so important, and I realized something from every other remark, that that's what United Nations is all about. Without collaboration, transparent and shared leadership model, we're not going to achieve anything. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I want to thank you again all for honoring me, the organization that I represent, and all the women and girls in this world. Thank you so much.
Just one last finger before we move on to the last part of our program. But before we get on to her, I just want to take a moment to recognize the members of the SPSSI organization that are here. Some of you have met them already. Anila, Bacchus and Anila, are you here? Can you just wave your hand? Thank you. Anila is our executive director, and Sarah Mancall is our policy analyst. And everything else that has to do with logistics. So thank you very much for coming all the way from Washington, D.C. Thank you. But now I get to introduce the president of the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, Dr. Abigail Stewart. In addition to serving as president, Dr. Stewart holds the Sandra Schwartz Tangri Distinguished University Chair, that's a mouthful, Professor of Psychology and Women's Studies at the University of Michigan. She's also the director of the UN Advanced Program, a program designed to improve campus environment for all faculty, particularly women and underrepresented minorities, with regards to recruitment, retention, climate, and leadership. Her current research examines educated women's lives and personalities through the lens of race, gender, and generation in a cohort of graduates from a Midwest high school. And I must add, as a personal note, Dr. Stewart, as a former Midwesterner and somebody who probably checks each one of those little boxes as the participants, I'm really going to be keen to hear your results. Let's welcome Dr. Stewart. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that extremely warm and lovely introduction. I'm afraid I may disappoint you because I won't be talking about any of that. I'm going to talk a little bit about SPSSI. It is my great pleasure and honor, really, as president of the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, to welcome you to this celebration of our organization's 75 years, I just want to repeat that, of engagement at the UN. That engagement means so much to SPSSI, and I just want to make sure you know that. It matters to us. It's deeply meaningful to hear that it matters to you as well. So thank you for that. But we would do it even if it didn't matter to you, because it matters to us. We all know that the UN, founded in 1945, and I'm quoting from it, remains the one place on earth where all the world's nations can gather together, discuss common problems, and find shared solutions that benefit all of humanity. SPSSI, as an organization of social scientists that brings research to bear on a wide array of societal problems, has an overlapping mission, as you've all acknowledged today, with that of the UN, and our joint connection makes that clear. I've been appointed to tell you some highlights of that history, to just make sure they don't get lost. Many of them have been alluded to tonight, but I'll just keep them in an order so you can see something of that history. I also want to underscore that today we're not just rehearsing the history and reminding ourselves of the great things others have accomplished before us, but recommitting ourselves to that collaborative commitment that has been so fruitful for 75 years. SPSSI was organized in the U.S. during the Depression in the 1930s, in an effort to bring together a national group of socially minded psychologists to address social and economic issues. It's understood its mission to include international issues from the beginning, and in 1947, its flagship journal published a special issue on the challenges of the United Nations, which were not yet well understood by anybody, and not by SPSSI, but it did its job of trying to lay out some of what the challenges might be, but also the hopes and promises ahead. Nearly immediately, SPSSI leaders and members collaborated with UNESCO, including its Tensions Affecting International Understanding project, as well as its Declaration of the Scientific Basis for Human Unity, studies of national stereotypes among children, and efforts to create alternatives to war or surrender. During the period from the 1960s to the mid-1980s, UNESCO was less engaged with social scientists at SPSSI, but SPSSI members' research continued to include a focus on international peace, disarmament, and conflict, as well as issues viewed at the time as national that have been talked about a great deal tonight, such as racism, civil rights, and identity-based social movements. Of course, not just here and not just tonight, those issues are recognized as fully international in scope. In the late 80s, SPSSI advocated reconnecting with the UN in a formal way and began collaborating with various working groups and committees on issues of common concern. Eventually, SPSSI established a formal UN team, which notably collaborated with other NGOs to advocate for adoption of the Convention on the Rights of the Child in '89. In '91, SPSSI's UN team was accredited by the Economic and Social Council to attend UN meetings, submit written statements to the UN commissions and special events, make oral statements, propose parallel events, and collaborate on educational panels. These are all things SPSSI valued deeply as opportunities, and having those rights mattered, like all rights matter. SPSSI representatives worked on the rights of the child and distribution of the Seville Statement on Violence, previously adopted by UNESCO during the early 90s, and later that decade collaborated with others on issues of mental health, migrant trauma, and aging, issues which we continue to work on today. The new millennium was marked by SPSSI team member participation in the development of Psychology Day, and subsequently the Psychology Coalition of NGOs at the UN. Several individuals were likewise involved in the successful effort to add psychological well-being to the Sustainable Development Goals established in 2015. The team has continued to participate in a number of commissions and other UN events. For example, in 2001, Coran Okorodudu led a 6-member SPSSI and APA delegation to the UN World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance, held in Durban, South Africa, and collaborated to insert language on health and mental health into the Durban Outcome document. Former SPSSI President James Jackson addressed the final plenary session of the conference on the origin, consequences, and elimination of systemic racism. Later in that decade, Pete Walker and APA Representative Florence, Denmark, mentioned earlier, planned the first Psychology Day, which continues at the UN, which continues as an annual event. From 2008 to 2016, SPSSI's advocacy of support for women and girls was led by Representatives Yvonne Rafferty and Coran Okorodudu, and focused on child trafficking and mental health of women and girls. So the kinds of issues we just heard so movingly discussed have mattered to SPSSI for a long time. During this period, Joseph Demer, also mentioned earlier, worked with the DPI and the South Korean mission to reinvigorate the UNGO Committee on Education, Learning, and Literacy. This time also witnessed, that period, the creation of the Psychology Coalition, a long series of conversations among psychology NGOs, including SPSSI, but also IAAP, ICP, and APA, identified the need for a formal coalition to amplify the voice of psychology at the UN. The ever-present Coran Okorodudu, Joseph Demer, Harold Cook, and Mary O'Neill Berry were among the founders of that coalition of NGOs, having consultative status with the Economic and Social Council at the UN. She served, Okoro Dudu served as PKUN's, if I may, founding chair of the coalition. Nearly all of SPSSI's UN representatives and graduate interns have participated in that coalition. This most recent period has been marked by continued efforts to focus on issues of well-being, education, and literacy, and the elimination of systemic racism and ethnic discrimination. Speaking for SPSSI as I do, we are proud of our history of engagement with the UN and humbled by how much there is to be done. Today, we not only recognize the continued urgent need for international discussion of common problems, but we recommit to our shared mission to seek solutions to those problems that will benefit all of humanity. Thank you.
Abigail, I wonder if you could join me in giving awards. At this point, SPSSI would like to say thank you and recognize organizations and individuals who've played such an important role in our work. You have to handle things carefully.
So while things are being prepared, I'll go ahead and say that it is my pleasure and honor to recognize 4 organizations for their commitment to social justice and the protection of human rights. So I'm going to ask that a representative from each organization come to the podium all together or in turn? One at a time, as I call on you, to receive your award once recognized. So our first award is going to the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica to the United Nations. SPSSI recognizes Costa Rica for its strong and unwavering support of human rights and social justice for all at the UN, and for Costa Rica's leadership in modeling national legislation, which we heard a little bit about, and policies for creating a society free of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Please come and receive this
The Parliament disbanded the army and put all the money in education. Wow.
Our next award goes to the UN Office of the High Commission for Human Rights. SPSSI recognizes the Office of the High Commissioner for establishing and maintaining the foundation for human rights in international law and monitoring and offering correctives for human rights violations across the globe. The next award goes to the NGO Committee on the Status of Women. SPSSI recognizes the NGO CSW for their steadfast dedication to promoting gender equality, human rights, and the empowerment of women and girls of various cultures and ethnicities through support of an effective international network, and so much more. Thank you. So, congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.
The last award was to go to UNESCO, and it will go to UNESCO. I will read the statement. SPSSI recognizes its 70-year history of collaboration with UNESCO in creating and building a global social science network and launching a scientific conception of race and studies of racial stereotypes and prejudice. And I will close this part of the program. There's more, just a tiny bit more. Congratulations and thank you to all of you recipients for your very important work.
We're entering the final part of the program. There are some individual thank yous that the SPSSI team would like to make. we'll ask you if we call your name to stand, if you don't mind, for a minute, so that everyone knows where you are. Then we will have a closing by our youth representatives, and guess what? We're going to have a toast at the very end of the program that we will start preparing very shortly. And you may follow along in your program the list of individuals. First, the not so, a little unpleasant news. This year, we have 2 retirements from the UN team. Dr. Rachel Ravitch, who has served as main representative for the SPSSI team and has been involved in numerous initiatives, including Psychology Day at the UN, the NGO Committee on Health, the development of side events, parallel events for many commissions, including social development, and collaborations with WHO and UNICEF. Rachel is the only member of our team that I know of who has actually worked at the United Nations as a staff member. She's also an accomplished expert on conflict resolution and negotiation. She was a terrific main representative, and she was a caring mentor to all of us who were new to the team. We're saddened to see Rachel go, and we very much wish her the best in her future endeavors. Thank you, Rachel. I hope he's online right now. Dr. Peter Walker also announced his retirement from the team this year after 30 years of service. Pete was trained first as an architect and subsequently received his PhD in environmental psychology from CUNY. He has been passionately involved in climate change and sustainable development issues at the UN since the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. He has also paid special attention to the impact of human well-being, of climate change, and sea level rise on coastal cities. Pete's steadfastness has kept the team focused on climate change, which is a difficult challenge, given how other issues always distract us. Now, there's actually research on this topic in social psychology. Write to me and I can share it with you, specifically about climate change. But back to it. Pete's UN activities also include his work with the NGO Committee on Aging and his participation in the development of both Psychology Day and the Psychology Coalition. Pete's guidance, patience, and wisdom have truly made an indelible mark on the team. Thank you, Dr. Walker. We would also like to recommend some individuals who have been friends to the team, affiliated in various ways. Dr. Toni Antonucci for her collaboration on issues related to ageism, her work on the International Day of Older Persons, and the Commission for Social Development. And she is also an accomplished scholar at the University of Michigan who does cross-national studies of life development, of development across the lifespan. Thank you, Toni. We have already heard from Florence, Denmark, by way of Dr. Cook, and we would also recognize her here. And she couldn't be here tonight, but we also recognize Dr. Susan Apatow for her continued collaboration with the team. Dr. Apatow is an expert in the area of social exclusion and social justice over time. She's edited Peace and Conflict, the Journal of Peace Psychology. She's been on the APA Committee on International Relations, Secretary of the International Society of Justice Research, and past SPSSI President. Thank you, Susan. We wish you were here. The SPSSI UN team would like to recognize Dr. Harold Takushin, who might just stand. Where is he? He's right there.
Thank you.
Harold has played a significant role in SPSSI, in psychology at the UN, Division 52, international psychology, and, pretty much psychology in New York in general. Harold Takushin is known for. He has selflessly worked with our planning committee in creating this event, patiently educating us regarding SPSSI's history at the UN and offering very, very good advice. Harold has been a true friend to our team, And, you know, we just thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Standing is optional, but I also want to recognize 3 senior members of the team. Maybe if we recognize them tonight, they won't retire. That's my hopes. Dr. Harold Cook. His service on the SPSSI UN team is focused on the rights of the child and violence against children. He's been on several UNICEF committees, including Children's Rights, the North American Regional Planning Consultation on Violence and Children, and a founding chair of the Working Group on Violence Against Children. He served on the Executive Committee for NGO Committee on Mental Health and is co-chair of the NGO Committee on the Family. In fact, Harold testified to a U.S. Senate committee on the adoption of the Convention of the Rights of the Child. He is no stranger to the United Nations, having served as representative for the APA team, as main representative for the IUCIS team, and fortunately also for SPSSI. Thank you. Dr. Joseph DeMeyer is another long-serving and wise member of the SPSSI team. Joseph has served on the SPSSI team since 2001 as a representative and main representative. He has been an executive member of the NGO Committee on Mental Health and the NGO Committee on Education. He is also one of the co-founders of the Psychology Coalition at the UN, the NGO Committee on Education, Learning and Literacy, and the NGO Committee on the International Day of Education for Global Citizenship. He's also served on numerous subcommittees. I'm sorry to say that Joseph is at home today with a nasty case of bronchitis and is unable to attend tonight. Not only do we miss him very much, but Joseph has been on the planning team for this event since its inception over a year ago. And, you know, truly, Joseph, we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you, Joseph. Last, and certainly not least, we recognize the indelible and significant impact Dr. Karan Akor-Dudu has made on psychology at the United Nations. I could list 10 minutes here. I will just mention that she's worked with the UNICEF Working Group on the Rights of the Child, on APA leadership and their application to the UN for accreditation, for the Working Group on the Rights of the Child. As you heard, she led a delegation to Durban and is one of the co-founders of the Psychology Coalition here. Also of the NGO Committee on the Elimination of Racism, Afrophobia, and Colorism. She is currently leading an SDG anti-racism campaign to encourage nations to provide disaggregated data in their voluntary national reviews every summer. I must also note that Karan is the most incredible mentor. She's helped all of us ascend what might be one of the most formidable learning curves ever, the United Nations. Thank you.
So Corinne has been a mentor to all of us, and she's definitely been a mentor to our 3 interns who have started this year, or start their internship in the COVID period, and are so thrilled to be here to join us today in person. I'd like to ask Yasmin Hussein, sorry, I do not usually screw up the name, but I did today. Sorry. Yasmin Hussein, Alison Goldberg, and Anni Sternisko-Wang. Where is Anni? Excellent. Could you please come to the podium? Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for being here. We are very excited to be at our first in-person event as interns on the SPSSI UN team, and it's great to see everybody in person. We'd like to once again acknowledge tonight's award recipients, the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica, the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNESCO, and the Committee on the Status of Women. We thank them for their collaboration with SPSSI UN over the years, and as emerging scholars working on issues related to social justice, we're also honored to follow tonight's inspiring and esteemed speakers who've done so much for this field. Yasmin and I are currently doctoral interns, and Anni recently graduated from the doctoral program in psychology. And we study very different topics, but they all have direct applications to social issues and social policy. Working with SPSSI has given us a rare and valuable opportunity to apply the topics that we study in real-world contexts. For the past year, we've worked closely with the SPSSI UN representatives and benefited from their extensive knowledge and expertise. And this internship has been a really wonderful opportunity for us to learn about the work of the UN and the role of psychologists in that work.
We've also appreciated the opportunity to work collaboratively with our co-interns and learn from each other, since we each come from very different backgrounds and have different skill sets. And we've had the chance to meet and work with past SPSSI interns, some of whom are here today. And it's been exciting to see what they are doing now and to feel as though we are a part of a larger SPSSI community. Since the first week of our internship, we have been able to get involved in many different projects. We've worked on writing statements with the PC1 Advocacy Committee, contributing to the SPSSI Forward newsletter, sitting in on mission visits, helping to organize a side event with the high-level political forum, and helping to organize this event today. Recently, we've each been given the opportunity to also co-lead on different projects along with our fellow reps, and we've also had the very exciting and surreal experience of being able to visit the UN grounds in person for the first time.
We want to take this opportunity to thank SPSSI UN reps, affiliates, and collaborators for allowing us to have such a rich experience and being such active members in the SPSSI UN team. Thank you for that. And we also want to thank the SPSSI UN representatives for the wonderful mentorship. We appreciate how you are not only invested in our professional growth, but also in our personal growth. As current and recent graduate students, we feel very fortunate that we are already valued members of a community doing such important work at the United Nations. Working alongside dedicated psychologists who have been advocating for human rights and social justice for decades has been an incredible opportunity to prepare ourselves for what we want to do in the future, working at the intersection of psychology and policy. So in celebrating SPSSI's 75 years of work at the UN and looking back at its achievements, we are excited and hopeful. Groups like SPSSI UN have paved the way for us young scholars to bridge psychology and public policy to work towards a sustainable future. Thank you.
Now, this concludes our program, but I did promise you a toast. So if you would like to join us, we have some glasses here filled both with some lovely sparkling wine and also some sparkling juice for you. And so I invite you to go get one, and then I also invite SPSSI's Executive Director, Anila Balkasim, to join me in leading the toast. So everyone may rise.
Good work, David. Good work. Thanks, Harold.
Right now, I'm very new in this. So
You're on top of things, Levi.
Say it again.
You're on top of things.
I overstayed my invitation by speaking 2 minutes longer.
Impossible.
I hope it mattered. I hope you liked what I said.
Well, you see people in the audience. Good for you.
You will share some of this.
Yeah,
You
it'll
will
be on.
edit it. Shorten.
Yeah, but you'll get the raw
Yeah,
copy.
that would be good.
Absolutely.
As
Thanks,
always,
Levi.
it's a good service. You always do. You just love these gadgets.
Well, no, that's my job today. It's been a long time with these in-person things. Hello.
Those are the things that, like, suddenly.
Oh. Is that an yellow basket?
Hello, Harold. So nice
Hi,
to
Harold.
see you. Yeah, and I think it'll go over really well.
Okay, we just want everyone to.
Once I get the phone, I'll let you discuss.
My bedtime is 8 o'clock now.
That's great. I know.
You think this guy's going to
There
do
we go.
something?
He's going to have a toast.
Everyone, we lack glasses. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Do be sure you have a glass of something. Or two.
I believe I got to wave a little bit earlier. I'm Anila Balkasoon, SPSSI's Executive Director, and I just want to say how lovely it is to meet so many of you for the first time tonight, but to bring this team together. And what I really want to do tonight is recognize the numerous volunteers that we've had over the years that made this 75 as important and impactful as it has been. We have large shoes to carry on in that tradition, and I want to give a special thanks to Dr. David Livert, who's right next to me, who leads the team now as our chair, so I think he really deserves a round of applause for the work. I know you have cups in your hands, you can, I'll do that for you. Thank you, David. Thank you, all the members of the team that you've heard from, I think many of them tonight, and I think, if you have a hand free and you want to wave your hand, I think we all just really appreciate all the work that you do and recognize that you're doing it as volunteers and in service to SPSSI. So thank you very much. I'll turn it to David.
Are you starting out?
No.
No, you want me to read? Okay, very good.
Lovely remarks.
Okay. We could say that today marks SPSSI's recommitment to advancing human rights, and that we have high hopes looking forward to the next 75 years as both missions guide our work, our outreach, and impact on society and the world. There will always be challenges to human rights and social justice, and our mission, all of our missions in this room will never end. However, we are heartened by the potential of social science to deepen our understanding of global challenges, from conflict to poverty to prejudice to climate change. The collaboration of civil society and nations is paramount in this undertaking. And even more crucially, we're encouraged by what we learn about policies and actions that can change human behavior for the better, to ensure that everyone on this planet lives a healthy life, thrives, and self-actualizes in a socially just world. Happy birthday, SPSSI!
Anniversary to you.
Bobby. Are you also a SPSSI member?
No, just my daughter. And then they sent me pictures.
That's it, Rob?